Sometimes the most extraordinary heroes walk among us in the most ordinary disguises. They mop floors in government buildings, fix broken lights in military bases, and empty trash cans where classified conversations echo through sterile hallways. They wear janitor uniforms instead of dress blues, carry cleaning supplies instead of medals, and blend into backgrounds where their past heroics remain buried under layers of security clearances and classified operations. But every once in a while, a single word spoken in casual conversation can shatter that carefully constructed anonymity. A call sign whispered in jest can unlock memories that some people have spent decades trying to forget. And when that happens, when recognition strikes like lightning in a mundane moment, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the invisible warrior is forced to confront a past that the world was never meant to know about. This is the story of one such moment, when a janitor's quiet life collided with a legacy that could never truly be erased, no matter how many floors he mopped or how many years passed in silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the Pentagon's third-floor corridor as Marcus Chun pushed his cleaning cart down the polished linoleum. His gray uniform hung loose on his thin frame, and his ID badge swayed gently as he walked. To anyone passing by, he was just another member of the invisible army that kept the world's most powerful military headquarters running smoothly. They saw the janitor, not the man. At 62, Marcus had perfected the art of being overlooked. His movements were efficient but unremarkable, his demeanor polite but forgettable. He had worked these halls for 8 years now, maintaining a routine that had become as automatic as breathing. Clean the offices, empty the trash, mop the floors, and blend into the background. It was a simple life, and exactly what he wanted. The morning had started like any other. Marcus arrived at 5:30, changed into his uniform, and began his rounds. He moved through the building with the practiced ease of someone who knew every corner, every hiding spot, and every shortcut. The early morning shift was his favorite because the corridors were mostly empty, save for the occasional early arrival or night shift worker heading home. As he approached the office of Colonel Sarah Mitchell, he noticed the light was already on. The colonel was known for her early mornings and late nights, a dedicated officer who had earned respect throughout the building. Marcus had cleaned her office countless times, always when she was away, always maintaining the professional distance that his position required. Today was different. The door was open, and Colonel Mitchell sat at her desk, reviewing files. She looked up as Marcus approached with his cart. "Good morning," she said with a tired smile. "You're here early today." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Same time as always, Colonel. You're the one here early." She laughed, a sound that carried more exhaustion than humor. "Couldn't sleep. Big briefing today about some historical operations. You know how it is." Marcus didn't know, though not in the way she might expect. He had learned long ago that the best response to such comments was a neutral acknowledgement. "I'll come back later if you prefer, ma'am." "No need. I could use the company, actually." Colonel Mitchell gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Take a break for a minute. You've been working these floors longer than most of us have been assigned here." It wasn't unusual for officers to make small talk with the support staff, but something in Colonel Mitchell's tone suggested this was more than casual conversation. Marcus hesitated, then carefully positioned his cart and sat down. His training from decades past automatically cataloged exit routes and potential threats, habits that had never truly faded. 8 years next month, Marcus said simply. "That's a long time in one place. What did you do before this?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus had prepared for this moment countless times, crafting responses that were truthful enough to pass scrutiny, but vague enough to avoid deeper investigation. Military service. Then, some private contracting work. Nothing too exciting. Colonel Mitchell nodded, but her eyes held a sharpness that suggested she was processing more than his words. "Which branch?" "Air Force, ma'am." "Pilot." Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came whenever the conversation veered toward specifics. "For a while, yes." The colonel leaned back in her chair, studying him with the practiced gaze of someone accustomed to reading between lines. "You know, I've been going through these old files about classified operations from the 70s and 80s. Some fascinating stuff that's finally being declassified for historical purposes." She opened a thick folder and pulled out a photograph. Even from across the desk, Marcus could see it was an aerial shot of a remote installation, the kind of image that would have been highly classified decades ago. This particular operation involved some remarkable flying, the kind of mission that required pilots with exceptional skills and unshakable nerves. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but internally, alarm bells were ringing. The timing of this conversation, the specific nature of her research, the way she was studying his reactions, none of it felt coincidental. I imagine there were many such missions during that era, he said carefully. Colonel Mitchell pulled out another document, this one heavily redacted. This one is particularly interesting. A rescue operation behind enemy lines that wasn't supposed to exist. The pilot had to navigate through enemy radar, land in impossible conditions, and extract personnel under heavy fire. She paused, watching Marcus closely. The mission was successful, but the pilot disappeared from official records afterward. No commendations, no recognition, no paper trail. It's like he vanished into thin air. Marcus felt sweat beginning to form on his palms despite the cool air conditioning. Sounds like something out of a movie, Colonel, doesn't it? She smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. The funny thing is, there are rumors about this pilot. Stories that circulated among certain circles. They say he had a call sign that reflected his ability to operate alone, to vanish when necessary. The room seemed to grow smaller. Marcus could hear his heartbeat in his ears, a sound that reminded him of cockpit alarms from a lifetime ago. He forced himself to remain calm, to maintain the facade that had protected him for so many years. Call signs can be very creative, he managed. Colonel Mitchell closed the folder and leaned forward. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. The use of his first name sent a chill down Marcus's spine. In 8 years of working at the Pentagon, very few officers had bothered to learn his name, let alone use it in conversation. Yes, ma'am. Have you ever heard the call sign Lone Eagle? The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. For a moment, the carefully constructed walls he had built around his past threatened to crumble. His vision blurred slightly, and suddenly, he wasn't sitting in a Pentagon office, but in the cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt, flying through a hail of tracer fire over hostile territory. He blinked, forcing himself back to the present. Colonel Mitchell was watching him with keen interest, and he realized that his reaction had been noticed and cataloged. I'm not sure why you would ask me that, Colonel, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. Because yesterday, a very interesting piece of intelligence crossed my desk. It seems that a certain janitor working in this building has been flagged by our security systems. Nothing threatening, mind you, but his background check revealed some inconsistencies. Marcus felt the world shifting beneath him. After 8 years of anonymity, after carefully crafting a new identity and living a quiet life, the past was catching up to him. Colonel Mitchell opened her computer and turned the screen toward him. On it was a personnel file, his personnel file, but not the sanitized version he was familiar with. This one contained information that was supposed to be buried so deep that it would never see daylight again. Marcus Chun, formerly Captain Marcus, Lone Eagle Chun, Air Force Special Operations. Highly classified missions in Southeast Asia, Central America, and the Middle East. Officially listed as killed in action in 1987, but somehow you're sitting in my office 37 years later. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at the screen, seeing his younger self in a photograph that brought back memories he had spent decades trying to suppress. The cocky pilot with a confident smile and the 1,000-yard stare, the man who had volunteered for missions that no one else would take. Colonel, I think there's been some mistake, Marcus said weakly. Has there? She turned the screen back toward herself. Because according to this file, Lone Eagle was responsible for some of the most daring rescue missions of his era. Missions that saved dozens of lives, but could never be acknowledged publicly. Marcus stood up slowly, his legs feeling unsteady. The cleaning cart seemed foreign now, a prop in a play he was no longer sure how to perform. I should get back to my work, he said. Marcus, sit down. The command in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a request from a friendly officer making small talk with the help. This was an order from a superior to a subordinate, and despite the civilian clothes and janitor's uniform, old habits died hard. Marcus sat. I'm not here to expose you or cause you trouble, Colonel Mitchell said, her tone softening slightly. But I am here to understand why a decorated war hero is mopping floors when he should be receiving the recognition he deserves. Some things are better left buried, Colonel. Are they? Because according to the families of the people you saved, some things should be celebrated. She pulled out another file, this one containing letters and photographs. 17 people owe their lives to your missions. 17 people who went home to their families because you were willing to fly into hell to bring them back. Marcus looked at the photographs and felt a familiar ache in his chest. Faces he remembered, names he could never forget, moments frozen in time when he had pulled them from impossible situations and delivered them to safety. They were just doing their jobs, and I was doing mine. No, Marcus, what you did was extraordinary. And the fact that it had to be classified, that you had to disappear afterward, that doesn't diminish what you accomplish. She closed the file and looked directly at him. The question is, what happens now? Because your secret is already out. The security review flagged you, and it's only a matter of time before others connect the dots. Marcus felt the carefully constructed life he had built beginning to crack around the edges. 8 years of peace, 8 years of anonymity, 8 years of simple, honest work. All of it threatened by a conversation that was supposed to be about taking out the trash. What do you want from me, Colonel? I want you to stop hiding. I want you to step forward and accept the recognition that you've earned. There's ceremonies being planned, documentaries being made, books being written about the heroes of that era. Your story deserves to be told. Marcus shook his head. You don't understand. There are reasons why I disappeared, why I had to become someone else. Reasons that haven't changed. Such as, there are people out there who remember me not as a hero, but as an enemy. People whose operations I disrupted, whose plans I destroyed. People who would very much like to settle old scores. Colonel Mitchell nodded slowly. I understand the risks. But I also understand that hiding from the past isn't the same as living in the present. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the courtyard below. Marcus, the world has changed. Most of the people who might have wanted to harm you are dead or too old to matter. The operations you disrupted happened 40 years ago. The wars you fought in our history now. History has a way of reaching into the present when you least expect it. Yes, it does. But sometimes that reach is a hand offering recognition rather than a fist seeking revenge. Marcus remained silent, processing the implications of everything he had heard. The careful balance he had maintained for 8 years was shattered, and he wasn't sure if it could be rebuilt or if he even wanted to try. I need time to think about this, he said finally. Colonel Mitchell returned to her desk and wrote something on a piece of paper. This is my direct number. When you're ready to talk, call me. But Marcus, understand that this conversation changes things. Your cover is blown, whether you like it or not. The question now is whether you want to control how that story gets told. Marcus took the paper and stood up. His legs felt more stable now, but his mind was reeling. He had prepared for many contingencies over the years, but somehow this scenario had never made it onto his list. Colonel, may I ask how you knew to look for me? She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. You might be out of practice, Marcus, but you're not invisible. Yesterday, when those contractors were talking about potential security threats in the building, you moved like a soldier, not a janitor. You positioned yourself to observe exits and maintain situational awareness that most civilians don't possess. Marcus closed his eyes, realizing that his training had betrayed him. After all these years of careful behavior, a moment of instinct had unraveled everything. Besides, Colonel Mitchell added, my father was a pilot in Vietnam. He used to tell stories about a mysterious aviator who appeared out of nowhere to pull his unit out of an impossible situation. A pilot with the call sign Lone Eagle. The revelation hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Colonel Mitchell wasn't just a researcher investigating classified operations. She was the daughter of someone he had saved, someone whose life he had changed without ever knowing the full impact of his actions. Your father was Captain James Mitchell, 173rd Airborne? You remember him? Marcus nodded slowly. The mission came flooding back. A forward operating base overrun by enemy forces, wounded soldiers trapped behind enemy lines, and a desperate radio call for extraction that everyone else had deemed impossible. How is he? He passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. Her voice carried a note of sadness. But he lived to see his grandchildren grow up, lived to walk me down the aisle at my wedding, lived to see me make colonel. All because you decided that impossible wasn't good enough. Marcus felt tears threatening to form, an emotional response he hadn't allowed himself in years. The distance he had maintained from his past was suddenly bridged by the living consequences of his actions. He talked about you often, about the pilot who came out of the storm like an angel of death, who landed in a hot LZ and refused to leave until every wounded soldier was on board. Colonel Mitchell's voice grew stronger. He never knew your name, never saw your face clearly in the chaos, but he never forgot the sound of your engine or the way you handled that aircraft. Marcus gripped the back of the chair, steadying himself against the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. He spent years trying to find you, trying to learn who you were so he could thank you properly. He contacted the Air Force, the Pentagon, everyone he could think of, but your records were classified. Eventually, he gave up the search, but he never gave up hoping that someday he would meet his guardian angel. The weight of the moment settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. The randomness of the encounter, the cosmic coincidence that had brought him face to face with the daughter of someone he had saved decades ago, felt like something beyond mere chance. "I'm sorry I never knew," Marcus said quietly. "You couldn't have known. That was the price of the work you did. Anonymity was your protection and your burden." Colonel Mitchell walked back to her desk and picked up a small framed photograph. "This is him, taken a few months before he died." Marcus looked at the photo and saw an older version of the young soldier he remembered, gray-haired and wrinkled but with the same determined eyes. Captain James Mitchell had grown into Colonel James Mitchell, retired, a man who had lived a full life because someone had been willing to risk everything to bring him home. "He looks happy." "He was. Thanks to you." The simple statement hung between them, carrying the weight of decades and the gravity of choices made in moments of crisis. Marcus carefully placed his cleaning supplies back on the cart, his movements automatic but his mind elsewhere. The world had shifted around him in the space of single conversation, and he wasn't sure if the man who had walked into this office was the same one preparing to leave. "Colonel, if I agree to step forward, if I allow this story to be told, what guarantees do I have that it won't put others at risk? Some of those missions involve people who are still alive, still active in sensitive positions. Any public disclosure would go through proper channels for security review. Names would be redacted, locations would be generalized, and operational details would be sanitized. The focus would be on the heroism, not the specifics." Marcus nodded slowly. It was a reasonable answer, but reason had little to do with the fear that had kept him hidden for so many years. "I need to know who else is aware of this information." "Currently, just me and the security analyst who flagged your file. But, Marcus, this information exists now. It's in the system, it's been documented, and it will eventually be seen by others. You can either be part of shaping how that story is told, or you can let others tell it without your input." The logic was sound, but logic had rarely been the driving force in Marcus's life. He had operated on instinct, on training, and on a moral compass that had pointed him toward impossible missions and unlikely victories. "How long do I have to decide?" "Take the time you need, but understand that time is not unlimited. There are people above my pay grade who are very interested in this discovery." Marcus pushed his cart toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "Colonel, your father was a good soldier. He followed orders, protected his men, and did his duty even when it meant personal sacrifice. I'm glad he lived a good life." "He did. And he raised his daughter to understand the value of service and the importance of recognizing those who serve with honor." Marcus nodded and continued toward the door. As he reached the threshold, Colonel Mitchell called out to him one last time. "Marcus, my father used to say that heroes aren't made by the missions they accept, but by the fact that they accept them at all. He was talking about you." Marcus left the office without responding, but the words followed him down the corridor as he resumed his cleaning duties. The routine motions of his work continued, but everything had changed. The invisible janitor was invisible no more, and the question that remained was whether Lone Eagle would finally come in for a landing, or find another way to disappear into the sky. Marcus spent the rest of that day moving through his duties in a mechanical haze. Every familiar action felt foreign now that his carefully constructed identity had been shattered. The weight of Colonel Mitchell's revelation pressed down on him like atmospheric pressure at altitude, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades, but recognized instantly. He finished his shift at 2 in the afternoon and drove his battered Honda Civic through the Virginia countryside to the small apartment he had called home for 8 years. The building was modest, filled with retired federal workers and young professionals starting their careers. Nobody paid attention to the quiet janitor in apartment 4B, which had suited him perfectly until now. Inside his sparse living space, Marcus sat at the small kitchen table and stared at Colonel Mitchell's business card. The phone number seemed to pulse with possibility and threat in equal measure. He had built his new life on the foundation of anonymity, and now that foundation was cracking beneath him. The apartment reflected his desire for simplicity and his readiness to disappear at a moment's notice. Minimal furniture, no personal photographs, no decorative items that might spark conversation or reveal his past. The only exception was a small wooden box hidden in the back of his bedroom closet, containing the few items from his military service that he couldn't bring himself to destroy. Marcus retrieved the box and set it on the coffee table. He hadn't opened it in 3 years, and his hands trembled slightly as he lifted the lid. Inside lay the remnants of Captain Marcus Chen's life, his pilot wings, a few photographs, and a letter he had never sent. The letter was addressed to the family of Lieutenant Sarah Williams, a medic who had died during his last official mission. Marcus had written it in a hospital bed while recovering from injuries that had ended his flying career, pouring out his guilt and regret onto pages that had yellowed with age. He had never sent it because Sarah's death was classified, her sacrifice unacknowledged, her family left with lies about a training accident. Looking at the letter now, Marcus remembered the weight of secrets and the cost of silence. Sarah had volunteered for the mission knowing the risks, and she had died saving others while he flew her body home to a family that would never know how she had really died. The photographs showed moments from missions that officially never happened. Marcus and his crew preparing for departure, aircraft being loaded with medical supplies disguised as routine cargo, brief celebrations after successful extractions. The faces in these pictures told stories of brotherhood forged in impossible circumstances and losses that could never be properly mourned. His pilot wings had been awarded in a ceremony he couldn't attend, presented by officers whose names he was never allowed to know. The wings represented skills that had taken years to develop and moments that had changed the course of multiple wars, yet they had spent decades hidden in a box like contraband. Marcus set the wings on the table and studied them in the afternoon light filtering through his window. The metal was tarnished, but still recognizable, still carrying the weight of authority and responsibility that had defined his younger self. He tried to imagine that man agreeing to step into the spotlight, to accept public recognition for private heroism. The phone rang, startling him from his reverie. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, and his first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. But something about the timing made him reconsider. "Hello, is this Marcus Chun?" The voice was elderly but strong, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Who's asking?" "My name is General William Hayes, retired Air Force. I believe we need to talk." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike. General Hayes was a name from his past, one of the few officers who had known the full scope of his missions. "I'm not sure what you think we need to discuss, General." "Cut the crap, son. I know who you are, and more importantly, I know what you did. Colonel Mitchell called me this morning." The directness was typically military, and despite his anxiety, Marcus felt a familiar comfort in the straightforward communication. "With respect, General, I thought that chapter was closed." "So did I, until this morning." "Listen, Marcus, I'm not calling to drag you kicking and screaming into the light. I'm calling because there are things you need to understand about what's happening." Marcus sat down heavily in his single armchair. "I'm listening. First, your situation isn't unique. Over the past 5 years, the military has been working to declassify operations from the Cold War era, not for publicity, but for historical accuracy. Too many heroes died in anonymity, and their families deserve to know the truth. And second, your cover was blown the moment you started working at the Pentagon. Did you really think you could clean offices in the world's most secure building without someone eventually running a deep background check? The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. How long have you known? About 6 months. We've been watching you, making sure you weren't a security threat. What we found was a man trying to live a quiet life, staying out of trouble, keeping his head down. But we also found inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored forever. Marcus closed his eyes, realizing that his sanctuary had been an illusion for longer than he had imagined. Why now? Why reveal this now? Because tomorrow morning, the Department of Defense is announcing a new initiative to honor classified heroes from the Vietnam era through the Gulf War. Your name is on a very short list of people being considered for recognition. The world seemed to tilt around Marcus. I never agreed to any recognition. No, you didn't. But the people whose lives you saved have been advocating for you. They've been writing letters, making phone calls, pushing for acknowledgement of the missions that brought them home. Marcus thought about Colonel Mitchell's father, about Lieutenant Williams, about all the faces in his hidden photographs. How many people are we talking about? Directly saved by your actions? 43 confirmed, probably more. Family members who lived because those 43 came home? Over 200. The numbers were staggering. Marcus had always focused on individual missions, individual rescues, individual moments of crisis. He had never considered the ripple effect, the generations that existed, because he had been willing to fly into impossible situations. General, there are reasons why I disappeared. Reasons that haven't changed. Such as, Marcus hesitated, then decided that honesty was the only option left. Operation Nightfall, October 1987. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. General Hayes knew the name, knew the implications, knew why Marcus had needed to disappear afterward. That's been resolved, son. The people responsible for compromising that operation were dealt with long ago. You can't guarantee my safety. No, I can't. But I can guarantee that living in fear for the rest of your life isn't really living at all. Marcus walked to his window and looked out at the parking lot where his neighbors were going about their ordinary lives. Mrs. Rodriguez was bringing in groceries. Tom from apartment 2C was washing his car. Normal people living normal lives without the weight of classified secrets and buried heroism. What exactly are you proposing, General? A ceremony at the Pentagon, closed to the public, but attended by family members of the people you saved, current military leadership, and select government officials. You would be presented with the medals you earned, but never received, and your service record would be partially declassified. And then what? I go back to mopping floors. That's up to you. There are opportunities available if you're interested. Consulting positions with defense contractors, speaking engagements at military academies, advisory roles with veteran organizations. Or you could continue exactly as you are, but with the recognition you deserve. Marcus set the phone down for a moment and picked up his pilot wings again. The metal felt heavier now, weighted with possibility rather than regret. General, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Shoot, is this about honoring the past, or is this about current politics? Are you looking for heroes to parade around for public relations purposes? That's a fair question, and honestly, a little of both. The military needs heroes right now, needs to remind people what service means. But more than that, we need to remind ourselves. Too many good people have disappeared into anonymity, and their stories are being lost. Marcus understood the political calculation, but he also heard something else in the general's voice, genuine respect and a desire to correct historical oversights. How much time do I have to decide? The ceremony is scheduled for next Friday. That gives you 6 days. 6 days to decide whether to step out of hiding after 37 years. 6 days to decide whether you want to control your own narrative or let others write it for you. The conversation was beginning to feel like a tactical briefing with options and consequences laid out in stark terms. Marcus appreciated the directness, but he also resented being maneuvered into a corner. I'll need to think about it. Of course. But Marcus, understand that this train is leaving the station with or without you. The story of classified operations from your era is being told. The question is whether your voice will be part of that story. After the call ended, Marcus sat in his chair for hours, watching the light fade outside his window. His neighbors returned from work, cooked dinner, and settled in for evening routines that he had observed countless times from his perch as the invisible janitor. But tonight, invisibility felt less like protection and more like imprisonment. For 37 years, he had defined safety as anonymity, success as the absence of recognition. Now he was being asked to redefine both concepts, to step into a light that felt both terrifying and oddly liberating. As darkness fell, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory, a number he hadn't called in over a decade. "Hello, Danny? It's Marcus." The silence that followed was filled with years of separation and unspoken questions. Danny Rodriguez had been his crew chief during the classified years, the man responsible for keeping his aircraft running and his mission successful. They had saved each other's lives more times than either could count, but they had lost contact after the program ended. "Jesus, Marcus, I thought you were dead. I thought that might be safer for everyone. Where the hell have you been?" Marcus looked around his sparse apartment, living quietly, staying off the radar, being nobody special. Bullshit. You were never nobody special. The simple statement carried the weight of their shared history. Danny had seen Marcus at his best and worst, had pulled him out of burning aircraft and patched him up after impossible missions. "Danny, I need to ask you something. If you had the chance to step forward to be recognized for what we did back then, would you take it?" In a heartbeat, the immediate response surprised Marcus. Even knowing the risks. What risks? We're old men now, Marcus. The wars we fought are ancient history. The people who wanted us dead are mostly dead themselves. What's the point of hiding anymore? The point is staying alive. No, the point is living. And you can't live if you're afraid to exist. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes, an emotional response he had suppressed for decades. "I don't know how to be that person anymore, Danny. The pilot, the hero, the guy who flew impossible missions. I've been a janitor for 8 years. I mop floors and take out trash. So, you think that makes you less than what you were? Marcus, you saved my life 6 times. You brought home soldiers who would have died without you. You flew into hell because someone needed to, not because you wanted glory or recognition. But what if I step forward and I'm not what they expect? What if I'm just a tired old man who's better at cleaning toilets than inspiring people?" Danny's laughter carried across the years, warm and familiar. "You idiot. Do you think any of us were what people expected? We were just kids doing a job that needed doing. The heroism wasn't in being perfect. It was in showing up anyway." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Danny updating Marcus on their old crew members, sharing stories from the intervening years, and gradually rebuilding a connection that had been severed by necessity, but never truly broken. "Danny, there's something else. They're planning a ceremony. Recognition for classified operations from our era." "I know. I got the call yesterday." Marcus sat up straighter. "You're part of this?" "Hell yes, I'm part of this. I've been waiting 37 years to see you get the credit you deserve." "How do they find you?" "Same way they found you, I imagine. We left footprints, Marcus. Classified or not, records exist. People remember. And some stories are too important to stay buried forever." When the call ended, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival that had sustained him through dangerous missions, but the quiet hope of possibility, of a future that didn't require hiding from the past. He opened his laptop and began typing, crafting an email to Colonel Mitchell. The words came slowly at first, then with increasing confidence as he found his voice again. "Colonel Mitchell, I've given considerable thought to our conversation and the opportunity you've presented. While I remain concerned about the implications of public recognition, I understand that my story is part of a larger narrative that deserves to be told." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "I accept your invitation to step forward with conditions. I want to review any public statements before they're released. I want assurance that operational details will remain appropriately classified, and I want the right to withdraw if circumstances change." Marcus read the email twice before hitting send. The action felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating, like stepping out of an aircraft at high altitude. A moment of pure faith in training and equipment that had never failed him before. As he prepared for bed, Marcus looked once more at the contents of his wooden box. The pilot wings caught the lamplight, and for the first time in years, they looked less like relics and more like badges of honor. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, and new fears, but tonight he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Pride in the man he had been, and curiosity about the man he might become again. Outside his window, the world continued its ordinary rhythms, but inside apartment 4B, the invisible janitor was preparing to become visible again, and Lone Eagle was getting ready to land. The next morning arrived with an unusual weight to it, as if the atmosphere itself had changed overnight. Marcus woke before his alarm, a habit ingrained from decades of military service and 8 years of janitorial work. But today felt different. Today he wasn't waking up as the invisible cleaner heading to another shift in shadows. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror, studying the face that had aged in anonymity. Gray stubble-covered cheeks that had once been clean-shaven for oxygen mask protocols. Lines around his eyes spoke of years spent squinting into the distance, watching for threats that might never come. His hair, what remained of it, had gone completely silver, giving him the appearance of a distinguished gentleman rather than a former special operations pilot. Marcus tried to reconcile this face with the young aviator from his hidden photographs. That man had been confident, eager, ready to take on impossible missions with the certainty of youth and exceptional training. This man looked tired, cautious, marked by years of deliberate invisibility. But behind the aged exterior, something was stirring. Colonel Mitchell's revelation, General Hayes's phone call, and Danny Rodriguez's unwavering support had awakened something that had been dormant for too long. Not the reckless courage of youth, but the quiet determination of experience. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, meeting at 0800. Pentagon, room 3 × 10 to the power of -492. Come prepared to talk. That Mitchell. Marcus realized he owned nothing appropriate for a high-level Pentagon meeting. His wardrobe consisted of janitor uniforms, casual civilian clothes, and one ancient suit that hadn't been worn in years. He pulled the suit from his closet and discovered it still fit, though it looked as tired as he felt. The drive to the Pentagon felt surreal. For 8 years, he had made this journey as support staff, parking in designated areas, and entering through service entrances. Today, Colonel Mitchell had arranged for him to enter through the main entrance as a visitor, complete with an escort and temporary security clearance. The security checkpoint process was more thorough than usual, with additional background verification and multiple forms to complete. Marcus noticed the guards treating him differently, not with suspicion, but with a deference that suggested they had been briefed about his status. Colonel Mitchell met him in the lobby, wearing dress blues that emphasized her rank and authority. She looked refreshed and energetic, in stark contrast to Marcus's nervous exhaustion. "Good morning, Marcus. Ready for this?" "I'm not sure anyone could be ready for this, Colonel." She led him through corridors that were familiar from his cleaning duties, but felt foreign from this new perspective. They passed offices he had cleaned countless times, encountering officers who had never noticed him as a janitor, but now nodded respectfully. Room 3 × 10 to the power of -492 was a secure conference room that Marcus had never entered during his maintenance rounds. Inside, several people were seated around a polished wooden table that reflected the overhead lighting. Marcus recognized General Hayes immediately, though the man had aged considerably since their last meeting decades ago. "Marcus, welcome." General Hayes stood and extended his hand. "Good to see you again, son." The handshake was firm and familiar, carrying the weight of shared experiences and mutual respect. Marcus felt some of his nervousness subsiding in the presence of someone who understood his background. "General Hayes, thank you for arranging this meeting." "Don't thank me yet. We have a lot to discuss, and not all of it will be comfortable." Colonel Mitchell gestured to an empty chair. "Marcus, let me introduce the others. This is Dr. Sandra Williams from a Department of Defense Historical Division." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Williams. He looked more closely at the woman rising from her seat and saw familiar features. The same determined jaw, the same intelligent eyes that he remembered from a photograph taken 40 years ago. Dr. Williams? She smiled sadly. Lieutenant Sarah Williams was my aunt. She died during Operation Nightfall in 1987. Marcus felt the room spinning around him. The letter he had written, but never sent, the guilt he had carried for decades, the family that had been told lies about how their daughter died. All of it was suddenly present in this sterile conference room. "I'm very sorry for your loss," Marcus managed. "She died saving others. That's what I was told officially, though the circumstances were classified. What I've learned recently is that she died saving others while you risked everything to bring her body home." The weight of the moment was overwhelming. Marcus had carried the responsibility for Sarah's death for 37 years, replaying the mission in his mind, wondering if he could have made different choices that would have brought her home alive. "Dr. Williams, your aunt was a hero. She volunteered for that mission knowing the risks, and she died doing what she believed was right. Please call me Sandra. And I know she was a hero. What I'm hoping to understand is what really happened during that mission." General Hayes cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should start with the current situation before we delve into historical details." He opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. "Marcus, these are the preliminary plans for Friday's ceremony. Guest list, agenda, security arrangements, and media guidelines." Marcus scanned the documents with growing concern. "Media guidelines? I thought this was supposed to be a private ceremony." "Mostly private," Colonel Mitchell clarified. "But there will be some documentation for historical purposes and likely some limited press coverage." "Absolutely not." Marcus's response was immediate and firm. "I agreed to recognition, not publicity." Sandra Williams leaned forward. "Marcus, may I ask why you're so concerned about publicity? The operations you conducted are being declassified anyway. Your heroism is going to be documented regardless of your participation." Marcus looked around the table at faces that couldn't possibly understand the complexity of his situation. Because publicity means visibility, and visibility means vulnerability. There are still people out there who remember me not as a hero, but as an enemy. "Such as?" General Hayes asked. Marcus hesitated, then decided that complete honesty was his only option. Operation Nightfall wasn't just about extracting personnel. We uncovered evidence of weapons trafficking involving high-ranking officials from multiple countries. Some of those officials are still alive, still powerful, and still very interested in keeping that information buried. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Sandra Williams looked confused, while Colonel Mitchell and General Hayes exchanged glances that suggested they understood more than they had initially revealed. "Marcus," General Hayes said carefully, "what exactly do you think you know about Operation Nightfall?" "I know that Sarah Williams died because someone leaked our mission parameters to the enemy. I know that we walked into a trap that was designed to eliminate everyone involved in the operation. And I know that the weapons trafficking evidence we recovered disappeared from official records within 24 hours of our return." Sandra Williams paled. "Are you saying my aunt was murdered?" "I'm saying she died in a mission that was compromised from the beginning. Whether that was intentional murder or acceptable casualties in a larger cover-up, I don't know." General Hayes closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "Marcus, I think it's time you learned some things that have been classified above your previous clearance level." He pressed a button on a device that Marcus recognized as a white noise generator, ensuring their conversation couldn't be monitored from outside the room. Operation Nightfall was a joint operation between the CIA, Special Operations Command, and the Drug Enforcement Administration. The weapons trafficking you discovered was part of a larger investigation into international arms dealers who were funding terrorist organizations. Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place. The mission was never about extraction. We were the bait. Not bait exactly, but you were certainly expendable if necessary. The real objective was to identify the source of the intelligence leak that had been compromising multiple operations. Sandra Williams looked stricken. "You used my aunt as bait in a counterintelligence operation?" Colonel Mitchell spoke for the first time since the introductions. "The leak was identified and eliminated within 6 months of Operation Nightfall. The weapons trafficking network was dismantled, and several terrorist funding sources were cut off. And Sarah Williams died for it, Marcus said quietly. Sarah Williams died serving her country, General Hayes replied. Just like hundreds of others who made the ultimate sacrifice in operations that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the courtyard where normal people were going about their daily business. General, with all due respect, that's a nice rationalization. But it doesn't change the fact that we were sent into a mission with incomplete information and inadequate support. No, it doesn't. But it also doesn't change the fact that your actions during that mission saved the lives of 12 other personnel and provided intelligence that prevented multiple terrorist attacks. Sandra Williams had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke with a voice that carried both pain and determination. I want to know exactly how my aunt died. Marcus turned back to the table. This was the moment he had been dreading for 37 years, the moment when he would have to relive the worst day of his military career. She died saving a wounded soldier. We had extracted our primary targets and were preparing for departure when enemy forces launched a coordinated attack on our landing zone. Sarah was treating a soldier who had been hit by shrapnel when a mortar round landed near their position. He paused, seeing the scene again in vivid detail. I had a choice. I could take off immediately with the personnel we had already loaded, or I could wait for Sarah to finish treating the wounded soldier. If I waited, we risked losing everyone. If I left, they would certainly die. What did you do? I waited. Sarah had 30 seconds to get that soldier stabilized and get both of them to the aircraft. She got him stabilized in 20 seconds, but when she tried to move him, another mortar round hit. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. She threw herself over the wounded soldier to protect him from a blast. The shrapnel that would have killed him killed her instead. Sandra Williams wiped tears from her eyes. Did the soldier survive? Yes. He lost his left leg, but he survived. He went home to his wife and 2 children, and last I heard, he had become a high school teacher. The room was silent except for the hum of the white noise generator. Marcus realized he was shaking slightly, a physical response to reliving trauma that he had buried for decades. His name is Robert Chun, General Hayes said quietly. No relation to you, despite the name. He's been one of the most vocal advocates for your recognition. Marcus sat down heavily. Robert survived? Not only survived, but thrived. 3 children, 28 years of teaching, and a deep commitment to veterans advocacy. He's been writing letters to Congress for the past 5 years, demanding recognition for the pilot who saved his life. The revelation that Robert was not only alive, but actively working for Marcus's recognition was overwhelming. For decades, Marcus had carried the assumption that his choices had been failures, that the people he had tried to save had died anyway. Are there others? Colonel Mitchell opened her own folder. 43 confirmed survivors from your various missions. Most of them living full lives, many of them in careers dedicated to public service. All of them crediting their survival to your actions. She spread photographs across the table. Recent pictures of middle-aged and elderly men and women, many with families, all carrying themselves with the dignity of people who had been given second chances at life. Marcus, you've spent 37 years focusing on the one person you couldn't save. But there are 43 people who are alive because you refuse to abandon them. Sandra Williams reached across the table and touched Marcus's hand. My aunt died doing what she believed in. But her death also saved a life, and that life has touched hundreds of others through Robert's teaching career. Her sacrifice had meaning. Marcus looked at the photographs, seeing faces that he didn't recognize, but somehow remembered. The young soldiers, the frightened civilians, the wounded personnel who had trusted him to bring them home safely. I had nightmares for years, he admitted. Dreams where I left them behind, where I chose the easy mission over the right mission. I've spent decades wondering if I made the right choices. You did, General Hayes said firmly. Every single time, you made the right choice. Even when it cost you personally, even when it meant risking your own life, you chose to bring people home. Marcus wiped his eyes, realizing that tears were flowing freely now. The emotional wall he had built around his military service was crumbling, and decades of suppressed grief and pride were overwhelming him. "What happens now?" he asked. Colonel Mitchell smiled. "Now you decide whether you're ready to meet some of the people whose lives you saved. Because Friday's ceremony isn't just about presenting you with medals. It's about giving 43 people the chance to say thank you to the man who gave them their futures." Sandra Williams squeezed Marcus's hand. "And it's about giving my aunt's sacrifice the recognition it deserves. Her story is part of your story, and both deserve to be told." Marcus looked around the table at these people who had gone to considerable trouble to find him, to understand his story, and to offer him something he had never thought he wanted: recognition, closure, and the chance to see the positive impact of his choices. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's do this. But I have conditions." "Name them." General Hayes replied. "I want to meet Robertson before the ceremony. I want to understand how Sarah's sacrifice affected his life. And I want the opportunity to speak at the ceremony about the personnel who didn't make it home." "Done." "And I want Sandra to be involved in planning how her aunt's story is told. This isn't just about my recognition. It's about honoring the people who made the ultimate sacrifice." Sandra nodded gratefully. "I would be honored to help." Marcus stood up again, but this time his legs felt steady. The decision was made, the course was set, and for the first time in 37 years, he was moving forward instead of hiding from the past. "Colonel Mitchell, you mentioned that there would be documentation of Friday's ceremony. I want copies of everything: photographs, videos, transcripts. If I'm going to step into the light, I want a record of it." "Of course. And General Hayes, I want you to understand something. I'm not doing this for personal recognition. I'm doing this because the people who didn't make it home deserve to be remembered, and the people who did make it home deserve to have their stories told." "Understood, son. That's exactly why this ceremony matters." As they prepared to leave the conference room, Sandra Williams approached Marcus privately. "There's something else I want you to know about my aunt. She left letters for her family, to be delivered if she didn't survive her military service." She handed him a sealed envelope. "This one is addressed to the pilot who brings me home." She wrote it before Operation Nightfall, almost as if she knew what was going to happen. Marcus took the envelope with trembling hands. After 37 years, Sarah Williams was finally going to have her say about the mission that had ended her life and changed his forever. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for bringing her home, even when she couldn't come back alive." As Marcus left the Pentagon that day, he carried Sarah's letter in his pocket like a talisman. The invisible janitor was gone, replaced by someone he was still learning to recognize. A man prepared to face his past, honor his fallen comrades, and accept the recognition that came with having made impossible choices in impossible circumstances. The ceremony was 3 days away, and Lone Eagle was finally coming in for a landing. Marcus sat in his car in the Pentagon parking lot for nearly an hour after the meeting ended, holding Sarah Williams's letter without opening it. The weight of the envelope seemed disproportionate to its size, carrying decades of unresolved guilt and unanswered questions. Through his windshield, he watched Pentagon employees coming and going, living their normal lives while he prepared to read words from a dead soldier who had somehow anticipated her own fate. The letter was written on military stationery, Sarah's neat handwriting still legible despite the passage of time. Marcus's hands shook as he carefully opened the envelope, trying not to damage paper that had waited 37 years to deliver its message. "To the pilot who brings me home," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back alive, but you did everything you could to honor the promise we make to each other, that no one gets left behind." Marcus paused, overwhelmed by the directness of her words. Sarah had written this knowing she might die, but her concern was for the person who would carry that burden. "I want you to know that whatever happened during my final mission, it wasn't your fault. We all volunteer for this work knowing the risks. We accept those risks because we believe in something bigger than ourselves. The idea that some people are worth saving, even if it costs everything." The letter continued for 2 pages, revealing a woman who had thought deeply about service, sacrifice, and the moral weight of dangerous missions. She wrote about her family, her hopes for the future, and her acceptance that those hopes might not be realized. "I've seen you fly," she wrote in one section. "You have a gift for bringing people home safely. Don't let my death change that gift into a curse." There will be others who need you to make the hard choices, to take the impossible risks, to be the guardian angel that every soldier hopes for but never expects to see. The final paragraph hit Marcus like a physical blow. If you're tempted to disappear after this, to fade into anonymity, because the weight of loss feels unbearable, please remember that hiding your gifts doesn't honor the people who died. Living fully, using your abilities to help others, accepting recognition for heroism, that honors us. Don't waste your life mourning hours. Marcus set the letter on his passenger seat and wept openly for the first time in decades. Sarah Williams had known him better than he had known himself, and her words from beyond the grave were both an absolution and a challenge. His phone rang, interrupting his emotional catharsis. The caller ID showed Danny Rodriguez's number. Danny, Marcus, I just got word about Friday's ceremony. They're flying me out to Washington. Apparently, I'm part of your story whether you like it or not. Despite his tears, Marcus smiled. I like it. I've missed having crew I could count on. Well, you've got crew now. Not just me. They're bringing in everyone they could find from our old unit. Tommy Morrison, Jake Stevens, even that crazy medic Rodriguez. Rodriguez? Isn't that your name? Different Rodriguez. Genius. We called him Doc to avoid confusion. The man who patched you up after that mission in Honduras when you insisted on flying with a dislocated shoulder. Marcus remembered Doc Rodriguez, a Navy corpsman who had been attached to their unit for medical support. The man had probably saved his life a dozen times, but they had lost touch after the program ended. How many of the old crew are coming? 12 confirmed, maybe more. Marcus, we've all been waiting for this day. We've all been hoping you'd surface eventually so we could tell you what your flying meant to us. The conversation continued for 30 minutes, with Danny providing updates on crew members Marcus hadn't seen in decades. Some had died, natural causes, not military action, but most had gone on to live successful civilian lives. Several had stayed in aviation, others had become teachers or engineers or businessmen, but all of them had been shaped by their shared experiences in classified operations. Danny, can I ask you something honestly? Shoot. Do you ever have nightmares about the missions that went wrong? Every damn night for the first 5 years. Then therapy, then time, then perspective. Marcus, we lost people. Good people who deserve better. But we also saved people who deserve a chance at life. You can't let the losses overshadow the victories. Marcus thought about Sarah's letter, about her insistence that hiding didn't honor the dead. How do you reconcile it? The guilt and the pride? You learn to carry both. The guilt reminds you that life is precious and choices matter. The pride reminds you that you made a difference, that you chose to act when action was needed. After the call ended, Marcus drove home through Virginia countryside that looked different somehow, as if the landscape itself had changed to reflect his shifting perspective. The trees were the same, the roads were familiar, but his relationship to all of it had been fundamentally altered. That evening, he received an unexpected visitor. A knock on his apartment door revealed a tall, slightly stooped man in his 60s, leaning heavily on a cane. The left leg of his pants was pinned up, clearly indicating an amputation. Are you Marcus Chun? Yes. And you must be Robert Chun. Robert's face broke into a huge grin. No relation, but you saved my life anyway. Marcus invited him in, struggling to reconcile this distinguished gentleman with a wounded soldier he remembered from Operation Nightfall. Robert moved carefully, but confidently, his disability clearly something he had adapted to rather than been limited by. I know this is presumptuous, Robert said, settling into Marcus's single armchair. But I drove down for Baltimore as soon as I heard you'd agreed to the ceremony. I've been waiting 37 years to thank you properly. Robert, you don't need to thank me. I was just doing my job. Bullshit. The profanity came out with such force that Marcus was momentarily stunned. Sorry, but that's complete bullshit, and you know it. Your job was to extract personnel safely. My job was to die if necessary to complete the mission. You chose to risk everyone to save someone who was already essentially dead. Robert shifted in his chair, his artificial leg clearly causing some discomfort. Do you know what I've done with the life you gave me? General Hayes mentioned teaching. 28 years in Baltimore public schools. High school history, mostly. But here's the thing. I've taught over 4,000 students during that time. For 1,000 kids who learn about service, sacrifice, and making hard choices because a pilot once showed them that one person's life is worth risking everything for. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with unexpected emotion. You became a teacher because of that mission. I became a teacher because Sarah Williams died, saving my life, and you risked everyone to honor her sacrifice. I figured the least I could do was spend my life teaching kids that heroism isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing to act when action is needed. Robert reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph. It showed a much younger version of himself in a hospital bed, surrounded by family members. His left leg was heavily bandaged, and his face carried the 1,000-yard stare that Marcus recognized from his own mirror in the years following his service. This was taken 2 weeks after Operation Nightfall. The doctor said I'd never walk again, never live a normal life. They were wrong about the walking part, obviously. He pulled out another photograph, this one more recent. Robert was standing in front of a classroom, pointing to a map while a dozen teenagers listened attentively. This was taken last year, just before I retired. 37 years after you, and Sarah Williams gave me a second chance at life. Marcus studied the photograph, seeing the confidence and purpose in Robert's posture despite his disability. You look happy. I'm happy. I've been married for 32 years to a woman who doesn't care about my leg. I've got 3 children who are all productive members of society. I've taught thousands of kids about the price of freedom and the value of service. All because you decided that leaving people behind wasn't an option. Robert set the photographs aside and looked directly at Marcus. But I didn't come here to make you feel good about your choices. I came here to tell you something that you need to understand before Friday's ceremony. What's that? You're not responsible for Sarah Williams' death. You're responsible for my life, and for the lives of everyone else you brought home, and for all the lives those people have touched since then. Sarah made her choice when she volunteered for dangerous missions. You made your choice when you refused to abandon wounded personnel. Marcus felt tears forming again, an emotional response that was becoming more frequent as his carefully constructed walls continued to crumble. Robert, I spent 37 years wondering if I made the right call, wondering if I should have left immediately, if waiting for Sarah cost other lives. Did anyone else die during that mission? No. Injuries, but no other fatalities. Then, you made the right call. You saved 11 people that day, counting me. One person died, but she died choosing to save a life rather than save herself. That's not your failure. That's her triumph. Robert struggled to his feet, using his cane for support. Marcus, I need you to understand something. Friday's ceremony isn't about the military giving you recognition you've earned. It's about the people whose lives you saved giving you recognition you've earned. What do you mean? There are going to be 43 people in that room who are alive because of your actions. Some of them have children, grandchildren, careers, contributions to society that exist only because you chose not to leave them behind. We're not there to watch you receive medals. We're there to show you what your choices made possible. The weight of that perspective settled over Marcus like a warm blanket. For decades, he had focused on individual missions, individual moments of crisis, individual decisions made under impossible circumstances. He had never considered the cumulative impact, the generational effect, the ripple of consequences that extended far beyond the immediate military objectives. Robert, can I ask you about that day? What do you remember about Sarah's final moments? Robert's expression grew solemn. Everything. The explosion, the shrapnel, the way she threw herself over me without hesitation. But what I remember most clearly was what she said just before she died. Marcus leaned forward, desperate to hear Sarah's final words. She said, "Tell the pilot he made the right choice. Tell him that dying to save a life is the only way any of us should ever want to go." The words hit Marcus like a revelation. Sarah had known she was dying, but her concern had been for his emotional well-being, for the guilt she knew he would carry. She said something else. Robert continued. She said, "Tell him that heroes don't get to choose their burdens, but they do get to choose how they carry them." Marcus stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the ordinary world where ordinary people lived ordinary lives without the weight of classified heroism or secret sacrifice. How do I carry this burden, Robert? How do I accept recognition for being a hero when heroes like Sarah Williams never got the chance? Robert joined him at the window, moving slowly but determinedly. You carry it by living fully, by using your gifts, by accepting that recognition isn't about personal glory. It's about honoring the people who made your heroism possible. He pointed to his artificial leg. This reminds me every day that someone died to save my life. Not just that someone died, but that someone chose to die rather than let me die. That choice obligates me to make my life worth her sacrifice. And you think accepting public recognition does that? I think hiding in anonymity while people wonder what happened to their guardian angel does the opposite of that. Marcus turned away from the window and looked around his sparse apartment. The space that had felt like sanctuary for 8 years now felt like a prison, a self-imposed limitation that served neither his own growth nor the memory of the people who had died in service. Robert, what happens after Friday? What happens when I'm no longer invisible? You get to find out who Marcus Chen really is when he's not hiding from Marcus Chen. Robert prepared to leave, but paused at the door. One more thing. Sarah Williams's niece, Sandra, she's going to be at the ceremony. She's got something she wants to give you. What? Sarah's pilot wings. She earned them in training, but never got to wear them in service. Sandra thinks they belong with the pilot who brought her home. After Robert left, Marcus sat in his apartment, surrounded by the detritus of 8 years of deliberate invisibility. But instead of feeling trapped by his circumstances, he felt liberated by possibilities. Sarah Williams's letter lay open on his coffee table, her words challenging him to emerge from hiding and accept both recognition and responsibility. He picked up his phone and dialed Colonel Mitchell's number. Colonel, it's Marcus Chun. I want to make some changes to Friday's ceremony. What kind of changes? I want to speak about the personnel who didn't make it home. I want their names read, their sacrifices acknowledged. If I'm going to be recognized as a hero, I want people to understand that heroism is a team effort. That could be arranged. Anything else? Marcus looked at Sarah's letter, at Robert's photographs, at his own pilot wings sitting on the coffee table. Yes, I want to wear my uniform. Not dress blues. I never earned a right to those. But my flight suit, my wings, the uniform I wore when I was actually doing the job. Marcus, that flight suit is probably 40 years old. It still fits. I checked. Colonel Mitchell's laughter carried through the phone. All right, Captain Chun, if you want to wear your flight suit to receive the highest honors this country can bestow, that's your choice. It is my choice. And I'm choosing to show up as the pilot I was, not as the janitor I became. Understood. Anything else? Marcus looked around his apartment one more time, seeing it not as a sanctuary, but as a way station, a place where he had paused to heal before continuing a journey that wasn't yet complete. Yes, Colonel. After Friday's ceremony, I'm going to need some help figuring out what comes next, because I think it's time for Lone Eagle to stop flying solo. I think we can arrange that too, Captain. As Marcus prepared for bed that night, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 37 years. Anticipation for the future rather than fear of the past. Friday's ceremony would mark the end of his invisibility, but more importantly, it would mark the beginning of a new mission, learning how to live as openly as he had once served. Friday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of a Virginia autumn, the kind of weather that Marcus had always associated with perfect flying conditions. He woke early, not from anxiety, but from anticipation, feeling more alert and focused than he had in years. Today would mark the end of 37 years of hiding and the beginning of whatever came next. His flight suit hung in his closet, cleaned and pressed for the first time in decades. The fabric had faded slightly, and the Velcro patches showed their age, but the uniform still carried the authority and history of the man who had worn it into impossible situations. Marcus had spent the previous evening ensuring every detail was correct, patches properly positioned, zippers functional, pockets empty except for a single item, Sarah Williams's letter, which he would carry like a talisman. The drive to the Pentagon felt different from every previous trip. Instead of parking in a service area and entering through maintenance entrances, Marcus was directed to a VIP parking section near the main entrance. A young Air Force lieutenant was waiting to escort him, treating him with a deference that still felt foreign. Captain Chun, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez. I'll be your escort today. The name Sarah wasn't lost on Marcus. He wondered if it was coincidence or if Colonel Mitchell had specifically chosen this escort as another reminder of the threads that connected his past to his present. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Has everyone else arrived?" "Most of the participants are already here, sir. Your crew members, the personnel you rescued, and various officials. It's quite a gathering." Marcus followed Lieutenant Martinez through corridors that were familiar from his janitorial duties, but felt completely foreign from this new perspective. They passed office workers and military personnel who glanced at his flight suit with curiosity and respect, recognizing the authenticity of worn operational gear versus ceremonial uniforms. The ceremony was being held in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, a space Marcus had cleaned countless times, but never truly observed. Today, the hall was arranged with rows of chairs facing a small stage decorated with American flags and official seals. About 60 people were already seated, and Marcus felt his breath catch as he recognized faces from his past and his nightmares. Danny Rodriguez stood near the front of the room, wearing a civilian suit but carrying himself with unmistakable military bearing. When he spotted Marcus, his face broke into a grin that erased 40 years of separation. "Well, I'll be damned." Lone Eagle actually landed. The embrace between the two men was fierce and emotional, carrying the weight of shared danger and mutual survival. Danny looked older, grayer, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had made him such an effective crew chief. "Look at you," Danny said, stepping back to examine Marcus's flight suit. "You look like you're ready to brief a mission. Feels like I am. In a way, you are. Today's mission is accepting recognition you should have received 37 years ago." Colonel Mitchell appeared at Marcus's side, looking resplendent in dress blues decorated with ribbons that spoke of a distinguished career. "Captain Shun, ready for this?" "As ready as anyone can be for something completely outside their experience." She gestured toward the assembled crowd. "Would you like to meet some of the people whose lives you saved before the ceremony begins?" Marcus nodded, and Colonel Mitchell led him toward a group of middle-aged and elderly civilians who were clearly waiting for this moment. The first man he approached was immediately recognizable despite 4 decades of aging. Robert Shun, standing proudly without his cane, wearing a suit that emphasized his dignity rather than his disability. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet some of your passengers." The introductions that followed were overwhelming in their emotional intensity. Each person had a story, a memory of the moment when Marcus had appeared out of nowhere to pull them from impossible situations. They spoke of burning helicopters, surrounded positions, medical emergencies in hostile territory, and always the sound of his aircraft arriving against all odds. There was Captain James Mitchell's widow, a graceful woman in her 70s who gripped Marcus's hands while tears streamed down her face. "You gave me 43 more years with my husband. You gave my daughter a father to walk her down the aisle. You gave my grandchildren their grandfather." There was Sergeant David Kim, who had been extracted from a remote listening post moments before enemy forces overran the position. He had gone on to become a successful engineer, designing bridges that would last for generations. "I build things now instead of destroying them," he said, "because you gave me the chance to choose construction over destruction." There was Maria Santos, a civilian contractor who had been caught in an embassy evacuation. She had become a diplomat, spending her career preventing conflicts rather than cleaning up after them. "Every peace treaty I've helped negotiate exists because you refuse to leave civilians behind." Each story was a revelation, showing Marcus the ripple effects of his actions across decades and generations. These weren't just 43 lives saved. They were 43 lives that had gone on to touch thousands of others through careers, families, and service to their communities. But the most powerful moment came when Sandra Williams approached with an elderly couple, Sarah's parents, who had traveled from Oregon to attend the ceremony. "Captain Shun," Sarah's father said, his voice strong despite his advanced age. "I'm Robert Williams, and this is my wife, Margaret. We're